Hello, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our first panel discussion today. The panel discussion will be focused on transforming the practice and business of law through DLT and smart contracts. And it will be moderated by one of my co-editors of the LEGALTECH book. I'm delighted to introduce Akber Datoo to you. Akber is the founding partner of D2 Legal Technology. And Akber has founded D2 Legal Technology in 2011. And he also acts as a trusted advisor to a number of investment banks and asset managers, including advising both ISDA and ISLA on the legal agreement digitization. Akber sits also on the Law Society's Technology Law Committee, where he chairs the Digital Asset and Smart Contract subcommittees. And he is the author of the textbook Legal Data, Banking and Finance, which was published and also has also written chapters on smart contracts and contract optimization in the best-selling InsurTech and FinTech books, which are published by Wiley. So thank you very much, Akber, for joining us as moderator and chair of this panel discussion. So I hand over to you to introduce your esteemed panel members. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. It's lovely to be here today and lovely to see so many of you join us here today. And as Suzanne mentioned, this panel really is going to be looking specifically at smart contracts, and I guess just from the name itself, something that you'd expect really to be at the cutting edge of legal tech. So pleased to say that joined by a fantastic panel in order to give their insights into this topic to you all. Each of our panelists were also chapter authors at the LEGALTECH book and had written extensively on this area. And I'll just go around the panel now and just ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. Dr. Anna, maybe if I could start with you, please.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Akber. It's lovely to be here. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. My name is Anna Elmirzayeva. I am a senior lecturer at the University of Law. I'm a lead designer behind our master's program on legal technology, and I'm also national lead for legal technology and innovation at the university.
Thank you. Anne-Rose?
Thank you. Yes, thanks everyone for joining this talk. It's really great to have you here, especially so early on a Thursday. So yeah, my name is Anne-Rose, and I'm a managing associate in the commercial and IP team at Mishcon Reya, and I also co-lead our blockchain group. And I'm also founder of Technology and Advocates' blockchain legal and regulatory group.
Thank you. Luigi?
Hello, good morning, everyone. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Trakti, a unified platform for smart self-executing and self-enforcing contract. And I'm also the coordinator of the Open Trust Fabric initiative, an initiative from the European Commission, DG Justice, to measure the European economy as an ecosystem of contracts.
Thank you very much. So I guess we're really diving into the deep end of legal tech, with this panel, and trying to see smart contracts and the value, the business value they can bring to this legal tech agenda. I guess we really need to start with what we mean by a smart contract, right? And it's a really broad field with unfortunately multiple and sometimes contradictory definitions of what we might mean most basically by a smart contract. And I guess just to set the scene before we hear from our panelists, I mean, I guess firstly, there's a technical divergence through all of this. The term smart contract was used to describe stored procedures in the Ethereum blockchain by Vitalik Buterin in 2013. But this very much conflicts, in many ways with the original definition that predates Ethereum by some 17 years, that it talked about seeking to automate commercial agreements in general and regardless of the technological platform that they might use. And, it talked about examples such as the role a Coke vending machine plays as a smart contract, referring, of course, to the paper by Nick Szabo in 1996. More fundamentally, there's also an inherent kind of conflict in the term smart contracts and bringing together two different kind of disciplines, both highly specialist. I mean, when you look at it from a computer science technology perspective, and we start with the word smart, I'm thinking of the difference between a phone and a smartphone and what that might allude to, and the law. And although on the surface of it, there might be many similarities that we might find between, a written contract and a computer program, they're both structured, they've both got some definitions, they both talk about actions that might need to be taken by the parties. There are, of course, very quickly you will see many, many differences between the two, and including, I guess, just these two separate fields and the language, the culture, and the perspectives that they might come across. So maybe if I can ask the panelists, Luigi, starting with yourself, I mean, what do you understand by smart contracts?
Thank you for the question. I think overall we need to understand the reality versus what it is the smart contract should be intended to be. First of all, the smart contract is a piece of code. Is a piece of code that can be used in order to do several things, can be programmed in order to execute commands, can be used in order to run an application logic in a distributed infrastructure. This kind of concept is connected also with some kind of activities that the smart contract can perform, like, for example, provide incentive mechanism to grow a community. And this is, for example, the intention of Bitcoin and the tokens in general. As a first intention was a way to remunerate the community for behaving good and giving free resources to manage the infrastructure. And then also what you can do with this code, you can also apply logics connected with obligation management, control, recording data, and share it in a distributed infrastructure. So I think we need to start understanding the smart contract first as a technology piece that can actually do something and can be programmed in a way to incorporate property rights or other type of logics that could be of use in law.
Perfect. Thank you. Dr. Anna, your thoughts on what we mean by a smart contract?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Luigi. I think this was a very good definition indeed. I agree that what we're dealing with here, regardless of the term contract being used, we're essentially dealing with a programmable piece of tech with set of coded instructions that execute according to and upon occurrence of a certain event. The common misconception, that comes from the use of the word contract, and I think Nick Szabo, when he used the term in 1996, he did create certain ambiguity around what the term means, is that we are dealing with a deterministic programmable code which leaves no room for ambiguity, which is essentially following a strict rule-based if-then type of logic, as Luigi mentioned. And it's interesting to see how we can connect the legal layer with the technological layer and actually make it an efficient piece of technology that different industries and lawyers specifically can use.
Thank you. I mean, I guess there's a bit of a worry there, right? I mean, there's clearly been a lot of excitement around smart contracts, and seeing some of that through the Law Commission's call for evidence. But I guess, this is kind of really bringing us back down to earth, right? If we're looking at this in quite a limited sort of sense in terms of very deterministic, that doesn't feel like the contracts that we know that, are so well supported, for example, by English law. And, I mean, what comes to mind there is things such as flexibility and being able to evolve as parties' relationships kind of evolve over time, and business practices may as well. I mean, I guess, maybe do we need to say, is this misleading to say that they're even smart? Maybe it's misleading to even say that these are contracts of sorts. Anne, I don't know whether you have a view on that.
Yes, thank you, Akber. Yeah, I discussed this as well in my chapter in the book, getting smart blockchain and smart contracts. And the name smart is a slight misnomer, as smart contracts are neither smart nor they're contracts in the traditional sense, as you said, in which these terms are understood. And the word smart really, as the previous speakers have touched on as well, refers to the automation process and the fact that the computer code has a degree of autonomy without recourse to human control. And it's basically slightly more nuanced if Excel functions. If X, then Y. And I think when we're looking at the contract element, that may be interpreted to mean either a legal contract, which is enforceable in the courts of law, or an agreed chain of actions that, although not enforceable in law, cannot be tampered with once started. And I think, the UK Jurisdictional Task Force did some fantastic work on this. And in the legal statement, which they published in November 2019, they considered these 3 questions in respect to smart contracts. First, are they capable of being enforced? Do they constitute binding legal contracts? And second, can parties' contractual obligations be defined by reference to computer code? And third, how English law actually addresses, issues regarding parties' anonymity or pseudonymity. And that's really exciting. It may be something we touch on a little bit, but in terms of a bit later. But with regards to with regards to all the questions, I mean, yes, the legal statement concludes that smart contracts are capable of satisfying the basic requirements of an English law legal contract. They are, that 2 or more parties have reached an agreement. The parties intend to create a legal relationship by doing so, and have each given something of benefit. And whether the requirements are in fact met in any given case will depend on the parties' word and conduct, just as it does with any other contract under English law.
Thank you, Anne. Dr. Anna, kind of your view. I mean, if we're saying that they might actually turn out to be contracts. I mean, you've got them on the legal course for lawyers. So, what's your perspective on this? Are they smart? Are they contracts?
I absolutely agree with Anne Rose. It's a very ambiguous concept, and if you talk to a lawyer, certainly they will tell you neither are they smart nor are they contracts, because they depart from this traditional understanding of what a natural language contract should be. And initially, the perception was that they're not contracts. The big question to answer was whether they are enforceable at all. If they are enforceable, what is the extent of legal intervention with these? But essentially, because we are talking about these self-executing programs, as I mentioned earlier, they are very far from the traditional understanding of what a contract should be. Of course, because they are scripted in a computer-readable language, there is no room for ambiguity where it comes to smart contracts. So we will not encounter a traditional concept like reasonableness, like fairness. There is no room for any interpretable terms in the code itself. However, as Anne Rose mentioned, the Law Tech Delivery Panel, their legal statement is very, very helpful where it comes to understanding whether smart contracts can be enforceable and whether judiciary can actually get involved with adjudicating around them. They can indeed meet the rules on the formation of contracts. I absolutely agree with this. According to the judiciary, according to the panel, smart contract as such will not necessarily define the agreement as a whole. And in my practice, I have come across lots of different models where it comes to smart contracts. We're not necessarily talking about solely code models where you only have the code and there is no legal wrapper around it. There are models where you have natural language contract referring to the code and parties agreeing to code having a legally binding effect, or there is an external model where you have contract drawn entirely in natural language, and there is reference to code, and parties can resort to using code for quick execution, for this deterministic, insurance of execution. So there's actually a number of models that law firms are experimenting with. And to mention the course that we have at the University of Law, initially we saw this need to upskill lawyers who are already in practice. I'm personally teaching a lot of professional development courses, going into law firms and talking to practicing lawyers. But we're also adopting a grassroots approach with our students, where we're making technology a pervasive subject with all of our legal courses. We have a dedicated master's program on legal tech, where smart contracts certainly feature as a topic. And I think it's very important that the lawyers coming into practice, the young generation, they have this conceptual understanding of what they're going to deal with where it comes to smart contracts. Whether these do actually create legal obligations, legally binding relationship between the parties. What is the extent of adjudication? What is the extent of the legal intervention? Are they enforceable? When the courts are clearing smart contracts, examining them for bugs, to what extent can they engage experts into this process? So I definitely think that this is an area that lawyers need to upskill and learn about.
Thank you. I guess I'd like to pick up on one of the things that we touched on there, I guess it goes to the smartness of them, right? And really, posing the question of what can we achieve from all of this, right? Or is it quite limited in terms of what this is going to ultimately kind of do for us? If we think about it in the kind of if then else kind of basis only, of course, there's many things that we might put in a contract that are actually going to be quite problematic. And I'm thinking about terms in contracts such as saying that parties will use best efforts or reasonableness. These are things that are really important in terms of maintaining that commercial relationship between two parties. As soon as we move into any sort of relationship that does something significant and complicated, right? As I guess modern commerce very much is. I think one of the things I know we talked about when just discussing this panel and some of the things that we might talk about is the role that things such as oracles would play there, right? So a kind of external input coming into these smart contracts and really saying that we don't necessarily have to have it all set out in the code like that internally within the code, but these could be things that can be input during the course of the life cycle of the contract, and there might be some determination made that's more subjective in that manner, by an oracle or third party. I don't know if anyone kind of wants to comment on that.
I think that let's say we need to start from understanding that smart contracts are, as we said at the beginning, are programmable elements. So we need to think about them as bricks in order to build our legal home, legal construct. So the way you use bricks can be very efficient or very inefficient. It depends from the architect and the people building it. That's the reason why you need a little bit of expertise in order to understand how to use those bricks to build what we call smart legal contracts. So something that combines the legal prose with the parameterization of the contract, with the execution of the obligation and the elements that you want to control. Then some elements can be controllable, some others are not. Relation is a long journey, and a contract code maybe cannot cope with all the elements, the inside out of a relation. Like if I should program my behavior and my intention with my wife, it will be impossible because every day is changing, right? So the same with the contract. When I deal with someone, the relation is going to change. But I can read from context. So the oracle gives give me the possibility to read from external data sources and from I hope, trusted data sources, because it's important to understand that we need to trust the data sources in order to get good data and to understand the context better. Then, there is another element in optimization we need to consider. The code is binary, yes or no. In order to embed a logic that is flexible, we need to build flexibility within a sum of yes and a sum of no. So instead of kicking out a partner because maybe for being late to a delivery, just one, probably we need to put some weights and collect those weights over time. And then if you go above a certain level, then maybe we can give you a penalty. So we need to start redesigning contracts in order to make them operational and capable to be connected with smart contract. I don't know if I answered your point.
Perfect, Luigi. That was incredibly helpful. I think I'd like to kind of bring this. We've talked quite a bit in the abstract. Let's kind of bring this to the real world, right? I mean, Luigi, you're the kind of founder, CEO of Trakti, an award-winning platform of smart, self-executing and compliant contracts. We can see a lovely banner behind talking about some of the advantages kind of there. I guess my question to you is, what actually exists today, right, in terms of these smart contracts, right? I mean, what can I enter into today, right? Or is, I guess, this yet another area, and we seem to be seeing this a lot these days within the kind of innovative tech space, that it's some smart technology or really a smart solution, but it's still really looking for a problem to solve. What exists today? What is tangible?
So first of all, there is already a wide usage of smart contracts and not smart legal contracts in the crypto space. So smart contracts are used in order to do DeFi, distributed decentralized finance, and to automate certain yielding or specific schema in this industry. But if we go beyond the crypto world, there is a very big application use case and interest in the market connected with traceability of product, control of production, supply chain, logistic, maintenance, payments automation, connected also with the control on delivery. At the moment, we see, let's say, the financial industry moving quite fast, especially in the crypto space, and in, let's say, enterprise and supply chain adopting those technology for operational management. And it is very interesting that the blockchain in this space is bridging the gap between communication between parties. And although there has been EDIs there since many years, the problem was that each company had its own piece of reality and data replicated and probably processed. So a big difference even in understanding one to each other. With the blockchain, we can reduce the gap. We can make companies closer and give them operational tools to self-control their operations. That is an amazing thing, because we have done a work, for example, in the automotive sector with a big company, and they have been able to recover a lot of hours wasted in administrative documents to check, for example, the lots produced or the lots exchange in production. And this is a lot of controls done in just one function of the organization. So there is a huge need. The market is there. There are still, I think we still need to improve the communication, explaining them the benefit of blockchain versus their internal back office, because for them it's still, I mean, there is still not a very good understanding there.
Thank you. And maybe we can come to you and ask you, what sort of real world applications are you seeing, right? What sort of industries are you seeing, and what are they actually trying to achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, what one key point to note too is, smart contracts are only valuable because of the data integrity on the blockchain. If you think about it, if we know the underlying data is correct, what level of automation does this enable? And it's huge. We've touched a little bit upon escrow arrangements. It's an obvious example. If money lands in this account, then, transfer widget, there's no intermediary, no associated cost in time or money. But examples can get far more exciting, and we've seen a huge range of use cases. And one includes, for instance, a blockchain-based solution for the travel insurance industry. Ever try and get an insurance payout for a late flight? It's excruciating. You need to prove who you are, that you have a policy, prove that you were supposed to be on the relevant plane, prove that the plane was delayed, hope that the plane was delayed by an insurable event, determine whether you could have mitigated your loss by getting another flight, etc., etc. There's so many different variables. And this company, it was a party of the FCA Sandbox, which is doing some fantastic work. And it built a solution whereby all of this data is based on the blockchain, and therefore has sufficient data integrity to allay any customer and insurer's fears of foul play. And by the time you touch down at your destination, you have a push notification on your phone asking you, how you want to receive your payout. Pounds, dollars, Bitcoin, Ethereum. It's pretty cool. It's very exciting. Increasingly as well, we're seeing a combination of smart contracts and AI in the formation of contracts. So, for example, where an AI-powered software agent negotiates the terms of that contract. And that's definitely something we're seeing a much more of a bigger increase in as well, this interoperability of the technology with other kind of more novel technologies out there. It's very exciting.
Well, I love the big smile and passion, kind of, just recounting all of it. And I wonder whether you've been, well, I'm guessing you haven't been delayed on a flight recently anyway, but maybe some long lasting memories, of that.
Very much so.
I mean, personally, as a technologist who then kind of became a lawyer, I've loved this narrative, with smart contracts that says that lawyers will need to become coders. And then, again, and apologies to kind of after that, those lovely real world examples from Luigi and yourself, and sorry to just introduce a bit of skepticism back, right? But, I was looking back at some of my notes. I did a webcast for the Law Society on smart contracts in 2019. And I referred to a research center the year before that had predicted that by 2022, more than 25% of global organizations will be routinely using smart contracts, which seems a little optimistic, given where we are in 2021. So I guess, and certainly I'm not really seeing that many lawyers picking up coding books quite yet. There's certainly still quite a big division between, sticking with the pen, paper. Microsoft Word probably is about, really in many cases, as adventurous as it gets. Interested, Dr. Anna, obviously you've got kind of, within academia and preparing our future generation of lawyers. Do you see this need? Appreciate it might not be 2022, kind of straight away, but, do you see this need, and is that something that you're helping prepare this future generation for?
Yes, absolutely. We have seen COVID affect automation considerably. There is a proliferation of automation of all kinds. And research actually shows that during the lockdown period, majority of businesses have sped up, have expedited their automation plans by 6-7 years. So in my personal opinion, there's definitely a need to quickly start learning about what smart contracts are, which does not necessarily mean that lawyers need to become coders. There's a need to pick up the coding classes and courses, because let's face it, many of us are not so enthusiastic or, plainly speaking, scared of code. There is a need, however, to understand what it is that we're dealing with and have that conceptual, foundational understanding of smart contracts. I'm happy to say that there are many companies on the market at the moment who are introducing this no-code approach. And I think this is something Luigi touched on, the bricks that you can use to build a very nice, application. I have dealt with a number of companies, trying to design the courses for our students, and many of them are actually asking this question: do we need to start learning code now before it's too late? So we've worked with a number of companies who adopt this Lego type approach. And as a lawyer, what you're actually facing is human readable provisions, which at the back end are linked to code. And for you as a legal practitioner, there is, if you're not into code, if you're not a coding enthusiast, there is no need to learn to be a programmer, or there's no need to learn how to architect these systems. That being said, I also want to add that smart contracts, they are a very exciting piece of technology, but they're not just tech. They're not just tech that businesses can quickly adopt and to make different processes efficient. They have this potential to disrupt many industries. And where it comes to law, there's a definite disruptive force there, because I think smart contracts are capable of affecting the area of contract law. There are lots of questions about whether or not we can actually use existing contract law rules without any detriment, or whether we need to devise a whole new infrastructure, a whole new legal framework for them. There's a potential of disrupting contractual relationships there. Luigi mentioned autonomy, and Anne Rose talked about certain freedom that businesses get when they engage with smart contract, when they use smart contract technology. They bring about a whole new way of transacting and receiving benefits, through Oracle technology, through engaging with blockchain, receiving benefits in real time. So I think there's huge potential there, and definitely a need to familiarize yourself with this technology if you are going to practice in any area, law included.
Thank you. I mean, just to maybe add some of what we've seen at D2LT kind of on this. I think one of the things that Dr. Anna and Luigi, you touched on it, and I think Anne, you mentioned it as well, right? Is the data aspect of this, right? And as we move into this digital space, what's running through this smart contract is data, and I think one of the skill sets, leaving aside the coding, which I'll come back to in a second, is making sure that the legal community is that much more well versed with the data that is central to all of this, because that might be where a lot of the issues arise. I think if we have bad data running through these smart contracts, then we're automating something that we're not going to be very proud of, and it's certainly not going to help, and actually probably comes back to the legal community in terms of disputes that will probably arise afterwards. And that's really about data governance, making sure that as lawyers will be used to defining things very precisely in a contract, we also need to make sure we define our data elements that are crucial. For example, how do we define this delay that this insurance contract that's now a smart contract might be referring to, right? Have we measured it? What's the start? Where does the starting gun start in terms of where we measure that? And there'll be lots of kind of minutiae there. Data fundamentally, has an ability to become very messy very quickly. So having to manage that. I mean, I think the other piece here is that it's a bit provocative in many ways to say that lawyers are going to be, delving into code straight away and picking up kind of, something akin to kind of, C++ kind of, books and coding in that sort of way. I mean, I think just from my experience as a technologist, it's not really jumping straight to that, right? There's, for any software development that's reasonably complicated, there's a process, right? And there's certainly a lot of specification that you would expect the business or the legal community, perhaps in this case, in order to be specifying what they need, that's then handed over to people to actually, develop and build these in, again, Luigi, coming back to your point, in a modular fashion, right, with different classes or building blocks. We think about the kind of rise of object-oriented programming languages, etc., as well. So I think, this doesn't necessarily mean that lawyers need to be able to code, But what it does mean is that lawyers need to be able to express the specifications and understand how those building blocks may form together to ultimately provide what they're seeking, essentially to represent the actions that those smart contracts are really kind of looking to represent. And I think just one other thing that I think might be quite useful to bring in at this point is also that, this is all about a series of abstractions, right? So we've talked about, really one, the highest level of it will be that business specification. But, at the other extreme, when we talk about coding, it can happen at so many different levels, right? And at the lowest level, that's going to be assembly code or machine language. And, even the nerdiest of computer scientists isn't really going to be coding these days anything vaguely serious in assembly code. But what you see is a series of abstractions and different higher level programming languages that arise that allow people to use things that look more common. They use terms that are familiar in the English language. If you think about things like C++ and Java, now the equivalent there for smart contracts, and I see we've got a question in from the audience from Drago in terms of the languages available. For example, Solidity is one of the languages that people use in terms of coding smart contracts in the Ethereum kind of platform. But again, it's not as scary as going all the way down to ones and zeros. These are abstractions. And then a further abstraction there will be, Dr. Anna, what you referred to, right, in terms of the no code. And really, I think maybe we can present this as saying, how for those of you that struggled with, for example, Excel and pivot tables, well, what you've probably noticed now is that Excel asks you a series of questions and wizards that asks you those questions in quite a very straightforward manner that you'll be able to understand. And then it kind of does all the kind of coding or the data management for you and produces the pivot table that you need. And that's kind of what we mean by the no code platforms, that, we're abstracting it in a way that lawyers can then pick up on those Lego bricks, those building blocks that Luigi talked about. Perfect. Well, I guess let's come back to some real legal issues, right? I mean, it just almost, again, and again, maybe being the skeptic in the room, right? So, are there any legal issues that we have here? What are the challenges? I mean, Anne, you talked about the, we can form a contract under English law when it comes to smart contracts. Surely there's got to be something here that makes it a bit harder, right? Where are the challenges, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one challenge is distinguishing between smart legal contracts and smart contract code. And people say as well, code's law. I personally don't agree with that. And a code isn't enforced like law, it's executed. And this self-execution, coupled with the improved data integrity of the underlying blockchain, significantly reduces the potential for disputes. And it's correct that the law is unlikely to have any role to play in the running of a piece of code that is, a mechanistic function. But wider questions are likely to arise in respect of the relationship between the parties to a smart legal contract. So, for example, whilst code will generally do what it's been programmed to do, what happens, as Anna mentioned as well earlier, when there are bugs in the code? What happens if a party is induced to enter into a smart legal contract as a result of fraud? And as noted briefly, the UK JT considered whether a smart contract is capable of giving rise to binding legal obligations. And they said, obviously, yes, if it fulfills the four conditions. There's an agreement, sufficient certainty, the passing of consideration, and an intention to be legally bound. So the key point, therefore, is interpretation. A judge would need to look at the contract as a whole and the admissible evidence and what the parties objectively intended their obligation to be. So where there's code involved, part of that exercise will be a determination of whether the code or part of it was intended to define the obligations or whether it was intended merely to just implement them. So in the former case, an investigation of what the code actually does, possibly with the assistance of expert evidence, may be needed as part of the exercise of interpretation. And where a smart contract subsists solely in code, and where that code is unambiguous, the judge may well need to do no more than decide that the parties intended to be bound by the code, whatever it does. And where there's a mix of code and natural language, or the code contains ambiguities, then we need to look at extrinsic evidence. And where code merely implements an agreement rather than defines it, the question of what the code actually does will be largely irrelevant to interpretation. But investigation of the code may still be necessary if a dispute has arisen as to whether the code correctly implements the agreement. So overall, very unlikely not to have any reference to, a natural language or the source code. And when it comes to enforcement, it's very difficult, if not almost impossible, for a court to order that particular transactions on the blockchain can be stopped or reversed by all of the other users on the blockchain, not only because the code may not allow for that, but also because the court may not have either the territorial or substantive jurisdiction to do so. But as long as the court has personal jurisdiction over the defaulting party, then, it can order that party to take such steps as are necessary to reverse the present or future effects of a particular transaction, or to provide compensation, for instance, to the innocent party, to put them in the position they would have been in if the transaction had not occurred, or the position they would have been in if it had occurred in the way that the parties actually intended. So, in short, the fact that transactions entered into pursuant to, smart contracts are self-executing and take place on a immutable blockchain does not necessarily pose difficulties for the court when it comes to assisting parties whose contracts have been breached, but there are certainly challenges.
Perfect. Thank you. And Dr. Anna, any thoughts on that? The legal challenges that we're going to see in this area, or what's going to cause us trouble? What's going to make us think about how this all plays out and works?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with Anne Rose that code does reduce the need for legal intervention, and code generally is considered to be clear enough in terms of encapsulating the intentions of the parties. But code may contain bugs, and this is something that judges will try to examine with the help of experts. One type of legal contract particularly that I wanted to mention, which is a solely code contract, I think that is the one that is the model that is the most contested at the moment, because we're now talking about code as contract, where there is no legal wrapper, there's no hybrid interaction between natural language provisions and the code. It's just a piece of programming that lives on the blockchain and individuals can engage with. And then there is a question of its enforceability, the legal obligations that it gives rise to. And I think this is where the judiciary, the legislature, they're trying to align, as I mentioned earlier, technological layer with the legal layer. And they're going deeper into understanding cryptography behind blockchain. For instance, when a user does engage with the solely code contract that exists only on the blockchain, and there is no set of legal provisions surrounding it, does the use of private keys, for example, equate to the use of electronic signatures? Is that something that could be legally enforced? Do electronic keys identify you uniquely on the blockchain? All of these questions, they would need to be worked out by the legislature. And the Law Commission has recently made call for evidence, trying to scope this area, trying to understand technological functionalities of smart contracts. And they're talking about creating a completely novel legislative framework around smart contracts to introduce clarity and certainty into the space.
Thank you. And actually, some of the things I was thinking about there is, I guess, what this, these innovative steps and this kind of, this new technology has also got us applying very old case law in modern context. I mean, those of you who may be familiar, there was a case on a yacht race from 1897, the Saturnita, that talks about whether one can, sail into this yacht race, and you don't know who the participants of that race are going to be, and could those participants then be bound by the rules of that race? And I think what's quite amusing for me about this situation, I mean, that's a case that I had to look at, as part of the work that ISDA do in the financial services space in terms of protocols. But it's also come back front and center in respect of the formation of these contracts and some of the disputes that might arise as well, because as soon as we're talking about DLT and the blockchain in the context of smart contracts, we may not necessarily know the true identity of all of the parties of that blockchain that we might be kind of contracting with, and might that cause certain issues for us. And I don't know if I could come back to you just. I know you've been quite involved on the law tech delivery panel as well. I mean, I think there's been some work there as well in terms of some dispute rules. I don't know whether you might be able to just talk for a moment about that and some of the developments there. Anne, I don't know if you think you might be on mute. We'll kind of come back to that. I mean, maybe if I can then kind of, with the panel, just ask, so what's next? I mean, I think, where do we see this all going, right? I mean, what are the areas in which smart contracts are going to flourish? Where are we going to be kind of spending our time in order to unlock some of the benefits here? Luigi?
So first of all, it's an exciting time for legal. And we need to understand that we are innovating, learning from the past and improving the future. This is what we need to go. And this is connected with a different function that legal will play in this new market. And I see an enormous application of blockchain into industry and economy overall. But we need to start thinking about different set of roles. So, for example, I see more the legal like an architect that is using components and is building a safe house where actually commerce and contractual relation can be established very efficiently. This brings me back to your point: is does the legal needs to know code? No, the legal should understand code first. Should understand the impact of code towards the operation of that relational contract. The other thing is that should know how to redesign a contract in order to make it fully operational. That means identify pattern, simplify jargon, remove redundant boilerplate or things that are not needed because of data, you said before, right? Now, compared to before, contracts can read data real time. And that means that we remove the risk out of, not all, but most out of the contract code, let's say legal code. And this brings back to defining which kind of data we want, which kind of data we do not want to manage effectively our relation. That means that if we do all that, and with the no-code platform like Trakti, where you can plug and play things easily, although it is extremely still complex to deal with all the different dependencies that you can have, you will have the possibility to set up a contract in no time and to basically execute with an amazing benefit in your back office of your organization. So companies can actually reduce cost in the back office, increase agility, and have better relation with their client. So in the industry, in the manufacturing, food, let's say all the markets connected with certification and trust, where actually certification and trust is important. We also work in defense. That is a fantastic technology. And we also need to remember that blockchain is very well suited for public administrations. So this is something that is important to consider.
Maybe if I can open up that question in terms of the future to Dr. Anna or Anne.
Yes, absolutely, Akber. I was listening very carefully to Luigi, and I think one of the main benefits of smart contracts is that with the help of oracles, they do read data in real time, and they feed this data to smart contract. They trigger the execution of smart contracts. So with this particular type of technology, we are removing a number of pressure points. We're removing the delay, we're removing a lot of the cost, we're removing human error to a certain extent. And all of this is happening in real time. And I'm sure, you know, benefits like this cannot be overlooked by industries. I read an article not too long ago which said the question with the smart contract technology and the question with the blockchain is not whether or not it's coming to your industry. The question is when. And I absolutely agree with that statement, because I think, you know, particularly with smart contracts, if we're talking about execution of obligations, real-time execution of obligations, speedy, you know, less cumbersome, any industry where you have contracts at the moment would probably try and use smart contracts at some point in time to speed up the processes, to make everything much more efficient.
Absolutely. I'm so sorry about earlier as well. I had the unmutable mute button. and I completely agree with that. And I think with that and with that speed and that need, that's why as well we kind of looked at publishing these dispute resolution rules, which was published, you know, only last month with the UKJT, and that is to enable, you know, rapid resolution of blockchain and crypto legal disputes. And I mean, the aim of it was basically to address uncertainty, you know, encourage fast resolution disputes, faster increase confidence for businesses in like adopting these digital technologies. And I think that is as well is very exciting, because as the use of these technologies increases, as businesses start to use them more, then, you know, we need to be able to have this element in place.
I mean, I think the thing for me that is all going to be really important is around making sure that we have the building blocks, the foundations there in order to support this.
Absolutely.
And I think one thing that, you know, really I've seen take off with you know, it's been fascinating, and I think really is an important part of this is, you know, ISDA, for example, in the financial services space, have been working on a clause taxonomy and library. And you might be asking, well, what's the point of that, right? How does that link into to smart contracts? Well, we're trying to automate certain business outcomes that we might want to put in our contracts, you know, and there's no easy way of making sure that we mean the same thing. You know, today there are multiple ways of drafting the same thing in natural language, which kind of works because, you know, a human can very much look at that and decide what to do as a result of it. It's just not very automatable, right? Which I guess is one of the things that we come back to in a lot of the definitions, automaticity of smart contracts. So what this project sought to do, and something that you know, we were fortunate to be kind of directly involved with at D2LT and lead for ISDA, is it actually just, at its heart, very simple, right? Let's enumerate and define all the clauses that might exist in this type of contract. And then let's decide and enumerate all the different business outcomes that one might try and get to and automate as part of a smart legal contract as well. But we've disassociated the business outcome from the wording, right? And then we can, you know, move into whatever language we want, right? You know, you could move it from English to French to German. You could also move it to code, right? And it could be written in Solidity. But the key point is that for this particular domain and this type of contract, we have defined standards in terms of how we refer to that automation, or you know, the steps that need to be automated. And I think that really is going to be the next key step in order to you know, actually increasingly deal with more complex contracts and really start, you know, coming back to that quote about 2022 and, you know, 25% of organizations, you know, materially using smart contracts. Well, it's still not going to happen in 2022, but at least, you know, we will see them grow in terms of their usage and what we can do. We've got some great questions coming through from the audience as well, and they're coming in quite quickly as well, so my screen's just flicking. Dr. Anna, there's a question kind of directly addressed to yourself that says that I mean, you talked about the costs of legal smart contracts being much lower. question as to whether you think they will be equally sold at that lower cost by law firms, or actually is it going to go the other way and actually going to increase the cost by the time law firms and the actors kind of get involved in this?
I think this is a very, very good question, and thank you very much for asking it, Hansa. Of course, we're not yet dealing with a finished product, and in an ideal world that I was referring to, smart contracts should be cheap. You're absolutely right, because the cost of deploying a smart contract on the blockchain should be considerably lower than what we're dealing with using intermediaries in the current centralized system. However, because we're talking about a very novel technology, at the moment, yes, we have to deal with law firms. We have to go through tech companies that open up that doorway to the technology that become the intermediary between blockchain technology and the users. So it's very much the same story as with AI. The technology is there, it's new, and at the moment, the cost of engaging with it may not yet align with what it actually costs to use this technology had you been interacting with the blockchain directly. But this is, a matter of time, I would say. We will soon be facing user-friendly interfaces. We will acquire user-friendly interfaces, very much like Google search with internet, a direct portal to blockchain, where if users wish to do so, they can engage with the technology without any intermediaries, and then the cost will drop considerably.
Thank you. Just taking one more of the questions. So we've got a question in from Miriam Taref. As a legal professional, even if we learn how to code, our coding skills are not as professional as a career coder. What is your thought about collaborating with career coders for business projects on regard to smart contracts? And I guess maybe just to I think we briefly touched on that, but absolutely, right. And I think we're saying that it's not going to be the most efficient thing for lawyers to turn into, the coders. There's going to be a gap there, right? Comparing to someone that's been doing that, since the beginning of their career. And I think, what we're saying is that for the legal community, this is more about being able to engage with IT developers and coders through being able to specify in a logical specification, essentially what is required, right? And help think through how the developer can then start to translate it into, and I'm coming back to probably the most famous example of a smart contract programming language, Solidity, for example. But this is not about needing to suddenly start writing masses of code, but being able to understand how it operates, how it's developed is obviously going to be very, very important. Conscious of time, and just probably take one final question that we've got coming through from Tony Guys. So what are the panel's thoughts about smart dispute resolution for smart contracts? Do panelists see smart dispute resolution, a tiered ADR approach managed online with courts, as very much the last resort?
If I can
you react to that fastest.
Yeah, I'm happy because I think it is interesting when and where those courts can have the right information and knowledge to respond to the challenge. The point is that if we make these applicable to everything without context, it is just risky. And so I like the approach, but we need to make sure that those people have competence and knowledge, not only about the domain, but also about the process, and also the eventual difficulty from a coding point of view that it is connected with the contract. So at the moment, there is no silver bullet. There are a lot of tools that we can use wisely. I think that the alchemy is that we need to try to put together something that works. Overall, I think, as Dr. Anna said and Anne Rose explained, we are in a very interesting time, in a very interesting moment where we are able to do things that we were not even, we didn't think was possible to do. And so now it is, we need to do a little bit of playing. And dispute resolution is one of the areas where In specific cases, it makes sense. In other cases, we need to just stop and see how to use the current tool. The only part that I would like to say connected with the regulation is going to be very important to validate and prove smart contract code before the execution. So this is fundamental, because if not, the cost of proving the validity of that thing is going to courts, and it's going to be quite expensive, though.
Perfect. Well, this was always a danger that, you know, with a topic in a panel like this, you know, we would rapidly kind of use up the hour session time. Big thank you. You know, you've been a great panel to kind of work with, and also a great audience as well. So thank you very much for all of your questions. And you know, I think some of us are going to be in the kind of lounging area as well here as well. So, you know, do feel free. I think that some of the panelists will be there as well. So if there are further questions, then, you know, please do approach our great panelists. Thank you.